Hey everyone, thanks for joining us. Of course, back here with Tim. We're going to be going into more kind of the psychedelic industry as a whole. Going to talk about recent Oregon news, of course, talk about the industry, what needs to happen to get it to the next stage. But first things first, Tim, how are you?
Great, Jason. How are you doing today?
Yeah, I'm good. I'm good. No complaints. We're getting closer to Christmas, if that matters. Time's flying. But hey, let's hop into it. So election stuff, some good, some bad, I guess we could say came out of it. But let's talk about for psychedelics. Looks like a lot of good. You had Oregon passing a law to decriminalize basically all drugs. Do you want to talk about kind of what that means for psychedelics?
Yeah, so Oregon and then Washington D.C. both passed those resolutions, and I think it's an important milestone for the industry, but not maybe in the way that some people think. First of all, what it doesn't mean is that all of a sudden companies are going to be able to start shipping psychedelics to Oregon. That's not going to happen. We still can't ship it across like state lines, still can't ship it across international lines. What it does mean is companies that are fully within Oregon or Washington D.C. can now operate in a decriminalized environment. But the more important message is what it means about public sentiment, about public policy. Not only did those resolutions pass, but they passed with an amazing majority. So what it says is that people are prepared for this type of change, and the public policymakers are ready for this kind of change. So Oregon has always been a thought leader in this space, and we saw that in cannabis, and we're seeing it again in psychedelics. And I think that the momentum is growing. In Canada, we've seen a number of Section 56 exemptions granted to people at end of life for dealing with anxiety with depression. And we've now seen people with cancer being granted access. So that's another indication of what Oregon and Washington, D.C. were showing us. The public sentiment and the public policymakers' sentiment has shifted here. And that's very good for the industry.
Yeah. No, again, I look at everything and cannabis was this way too. I know we're going to chat a small amount. You had a point there. But really talking about the fact that, this is a marathon, not a race, and this is a good domino to fall as we move forward. And kind of leads into, the next question, which is, what needs to happen in the psychedelic industry to get it to the next level? What takes us from, and maybe you can start with where you think we are now to, of course, treating, millions and millions of people for depression or addiction or something like that.
Right. So again, in making a reference back to cannabis, and again, this isn't cannabis, but if you look at what happened with cannabis in Canada and the US, I think the psychedelics are where cannabis was maybe 6 to 8 years ago. And if you look in the US at for example, Colorado, which was one of the early states to decriminalize, and how long it was, that's been 6 years ago that they decriminalized in Oregon as well. So it's been a long time. And in Canada, you saw the first legal use of cannabis for medical use back then, and under special rules and exemptions. So I think the industry's got to have that public policy continue to evolve. I think that we need to make sure that we, as an industry, we maintain the straight and narrow, that this is not about recreational use. This is about therapeutic use to treat very serious mental health issues. And I haven't heard any companies that have talked about a recreational use. And I think that that's, at least in North America, way over the horizon before there's going to be any dialogue around the legal use of psychedelics for recreational purposes. So staying focused on the science and the evidence-based side of things, showing the legitimacy of the industry, making sure that any operators, any companies that are in the space that don't have substance to them, that aren't backing up their strategy and their business plan with actions, are not being supported and don't tarnish the entire industry. I think all of those things are important. And finally, what needs to happen is we need to develop a supply chain to support the industry. As there are more and more people granted exemptions, there's the need for the patient needs a safe and reliable supply. The researchers and the compounders need a safe and reliable supply. And importantly, the public policymakers, Health Canada and the FDA, need a safe and reliable supply so that they know that they're doing a responsible thing and making sure that they're delivering products to the people that have been granted access, that have been prepared in the right way, have been properly tested, are without any contaminants, and are dosed appropriately. And for HAVN Life, that's really our focus, is building a compound library around safe and reliable supply and being the supply chain to support the industry.
Yeah. No, you did a great job positioned kind of, where psychedelics are today and obviously where they can go. A big I guess mindset in the industry you even see, with investors, but also with regulators, is people look at it. There's always going to be noise in hot industries, and there's really only a select amount of companies actually touching any of these substances. Obviously, Haven being one, which is fantastic. Really just kind of talking about the steps to go forward, for people that weren't familiar. Obviously, you're already talking in cannabis, you had the first couple states, decriminalize it and move forward that way. For Health Canada, for the FDA, for people that aren't aware of kind of the drug process, and the pharma process, do you want to talk about that a tiny bit? Maybe give 30 seconds on what the stages are there to get to, finally you have something you can sell to, a clinic or whatever.
Right. So the approval of drugs, new pharmaceutical drugs, is very rigorous and appropriately so. We don't want to have unintended consequences. We don't want to release something into the market that does more harm than good. So you have to make sure that the safety is there, and you have to validate the efficacy of it, that the therapeutic benefit is being delivered without unnecessary risk. So it takes years to do that. We're seeing right now with COVID, we are seeing some acceleration of that process in Canada and the US in the development of a vaccine, but that's a serious exemption to an exception to the rules. Normally you're talking a 3 to 6 year timeline, and I think that with psychedelics, that's what we'll be seeing, is a 3 to 6 year timeline to go through clinical trials at the various stages and sizes. First validating the safety of it. You start with animal studies, and then you go through various scales of studies with increasing rigor. And we're in the very, very early stages of that in this industry. So, I think that the companies that have set themselves up with the appropriate teams and skills to do this are the ones that are going to lead. And again, just to think back to cannabis, that was one of the gaps that we observed in what happened in cannabis, is too many of those companies didn't bring operators into the space soon enough. They had stock promoters and they had growers in the early days, but they didn't bring in actual policy people. They didn't bring in operators. They didn't bring in the necessary science people early enough into that. And so they didn't develop a clear path to revenue and to a business that really made sense. A lot of it was rhetoric and a lot of it was flash with some companies, but those that pulled in the operators soon enough were successful. So again, I'm proud of what we've done at Haven of taking our science team, which was an excellent science team, and pairing them with business operators that have the policy side of things covered, the science, manufacturing, supply chain, and all the other components covered, so that we can take that science and pull it through to a successful business model, and a sustainable business.